What's up, vintage lovers? Welcome to the Vintage Aquarium. I'm your host, Kate, a writer and storyteller with a passion for all things vintage. Each week, I'll talk with other sellers and collectors about their vintage passions too. We'll share tips and resources, and together, discover the stories and history behind our favorite items. It's time, so let's dive in. Welcome, everyone, to the fourth episode of the Vintage Aquarium podcast. I'm so pleased to have a guest today, Cherrish Kraz. Is that how you say your last name?
Krasulak.
Krasulak. All right, welcome.
Yes.
Actually,
Welcome.
Cherrish and I were introduced through Tina of Tina's Timeless Threads. She was in the last episode, episode 3. Cherrish and Tina are working together on a line of clothing, but Cherrish has so much more going on in addition to that. And so I wanted to just introduce her a little bit. Cherrish is a fashion enthusiast. She's a seamstress, designer, and a World War II reenactor. She also collects vintage jewelry and various antiques. She lives in Delaware with her husband, and she has 2 children. She's currently working on a line of play suits, which I just mentioned, and those will be available this summer. A side note, Cherrish is an amazing woman. She's also had lymphoma three times, and you're currently wrapping up immunotherapy treatment.
Yes.
And continues to do all of the other wonderful things, be a mother, be a wife, work on your business.
It's a lot.
Do all
I try.
do all the reenacting, everything that you do. So anyway, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. You look beautiful.
Thank you. And you too. And I appreciate you having me on because this is a lot of fun. And it's also good for mental health, to, do this kind of thing. It's fun.
Yeah, I agree. I so am enjoying learning about everyone that's been on the podcast so far. And can you describe your outfit a little bit for the people that aren't able to watch on YouTube?
Oh, okay. So what I'm wearing is actually a vintage cashmere cardigan that was gifted to me several years ago, and a vintage like 40s, 50s brooch, some costume dangly earrings, hair snood because my hair is not with it today, so I just covered it with a snood, and a polka dot dress that I made a couple years ago. It's comfortable, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and it's all in a beautiful red color, and your dress is white with red polka dots, and
Oh yes, that's one of my favorite colors to wear.
and your lipstick is on point, and I think your hair looks great
Thank
too.
you.
So.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so maybe we can talk a little bit. A good place to start would be like to talk about what kind of vintage you're interested in, just to share a little bit about that.
Okay, so basically my vintage story kind of started when I was in high school, and my sister lived next door to me, and she worked at a thrift store, and she would bring me home vintage clothes as a joke. But actually I ended up really liking them, so it wasn't a joke. The joke was on her. And that's kind of where I started way back then. Now I haven't been consistent with it since that early on, but the interest really started then. And then when I studied fashion design in college for a while, I really fell in love with fashion history. That was my favorite subject other than pattern drafting. And I just loved fashion history. I thought it was so fascinating to me. And it's just, I don't know why, it's just always done something to my soul to kind of time travel in a sense. It always it feels like time traveling. So that's my interest in vintage fashion. That's where it stemmed from. But I really started dressing more vintage for myself, more for mental health, just because I enjoy doing it. And that's relating to my cancer journey. Just doing something kind for yourself, whether it's just putting on some lipstick and wearing a vintage dress. It may not even be worn out of the house, but for me, I felt better. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, my interest and where it stemmed from.
I think that's a really great point that you have, because I'm, as a breast cancer survivor, going through all of that myself. I completely understand about how, sometimes you just need that little touch, that little thing that helps you feel better about yourself. And
yeah, like a little touch of joy, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Color, something like that. And then also I think that you take a lot of stock of your life and think about like, what's my authentic self? Who am I? What do I enjoy?
That's very well put. I didn't really think of it that way, but that's exactly what I did.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I can tell that your clothing brings you joy because it's just
Thank you.
perfect.
Oh, thank you. Like I said, it does, and some people might think it's shallow, but for me, it's not.
No, absolutely. I don't think so. I don't think so in the least, not in the least. Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, we should do what brings us joy.
Yes.
Yep. So that's awesome. Okay, so tell me a little bit about your love for World War II reenacting. Where do you, in addition to your daily life, like where do you wear your vintage clothing? How do you express yourself? I mean, there's so much of a bigger, larger story than this. Like, how did you get interested in that?
So I've always been a history person. Like I've enjoyed history. But when I homeschooled my son during the pandemic and so we did 2 years of homeschool for his fourth and fifth grade, and he loves airplanes, and he, doesn't get that from anyone in the family really, except for maybe his grandpa, great grandpa. But anyway, so he's kind of inspired me to dig deeper in World War II history, and I kind of revisited it, and I was like, this is really interesting. And then it kind of just struck a nerve with me as far as like, with the PTSD and how it relates to especially what the combat veterans dealt with in those days. And so I guess all of that just it felt at home to me, to revisit some of that history and to appreciate it a little bit more.
Mhm.
And so long story short, in a nutshell, my son's interest in the aviation along with his history influenced me a lot to kind of push me around the certain people, and they kind of recruited me to be a reenactor, because there's a museum here that is the Air Mobility Command Museum in Dover. It's basically on Dover Air Force Base, but it's on the side where you can actually get in. And we have so many like airplanes, and I mean, it's definitely a good place to visit, especially for kids. But that's where I reenact or we do events. Um, but I definitely don't need the excuse to just do that to dress in vintage. I can also do it whenever I feel like it. If I'm going to go to like a car show, for instance, I'll just wear whatever.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. Well, so I imagine that it gives people a more authentic experience when they're going to these events.
Yes, I believe so. And that's why I really like doing it, because it gives me a chance to educate and also even inspire like younger kids, Um, and I get a lot of, I feel like the two groups of people that appreciate it the most are like the younger kids and then like the older people. Because like the older generation, they kind of, oh, that's how my mom dressed, or, my mom wore her hair like that, or,
They
you know,
remember, they have
my
memories.
dad was in World War II. Like that's what I get all the time. And he did this and he was there. And it's really, it's kind of humbling in a way, because I mean, I wasn't in World War II, obviously, but I can, definitely educate, you know, about what people went through.
Yeah, it feels like a living history.
And that's exactly what we're called as living history teams.
Oh,
Yes.
that's really neat. That's cool. So what kind of, I would call them characters, I guess, but you call them impressions?
Yeah.
Um,
So in the reenactment community, people call it an impression. So like, you'll see that a lot. Like, but that's just because you're giving the impression that you were that character. So two that I have done recently, I would like to do some more, but because I'm relatively new at this, the World War II reenacting, but Rosie the Riveter, because that's widely recognized,
mhm.
and also a women Air Force service pilot, a WASP. So the ladies who flew the airplanes in World War II, but they were not in the military, even though they were training to be in the military. It was a training program, and they ferried planes and did various training programs for the military to alleviate some of the men, so they could actually go in combat, because women weren't allowed to fly in combat.
But that's an amazing piece of history that I didn't know about previously, that
Yeah,
women were actually flying in World War II.
right, because they didn't actually fly in combat until many, many years later, like almost 4 decades later. So,
Okay, wow. And I saw a really great picture of you in your uniform on Instagram. I
oh
was
yes, that's the
looking at,
dress blues wasp uniform.
okay. So were they flying in skirts like that?
So they would have to wear that for like a formal occasion,
Mhm.
and they wouldn't be able to. It's kind of complicated because they were getting integrated, but they weren't integrated into the military. So the army kind of gave them whatever they had left over, but towards the end of the training, they did get their dress blues, and they would not necessarily wear that flying unless I imagine that it was like a short flight. They did have trousers too. So I
Okay.
imagine if they had to wear the dress boots, they would have put the trousers on because I don't see climbing in and out of the cockpit with a skirt. I mean, that's just, but they usually wore flight suits and just like regular pilots. You know, but that's for like special events like parades and also if they're like on a military base and they want to go and eat lunch in the officers' mess, and they would have to wear their dress blues to get in.
Okay. Okay. That makes a lot of sense to me. So they have,
Yeah.
but they had flight suits. Yeah, of course they did. Right.
Yeah, and I wear those too. And it was like, unfortunately, it was like a regular like men's flight suit, but they're actually kind of cool though because you can cinch it in on your waist and roll up the sleeves, and you can kind of feminize it a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. As we
Comfortable.
That's really, really interesting piece of history. So, um, and then you were saying that the other impression that you like to portray is Rosie the Riveter, which yes,
Yes.
that is very recognizable. And so, I mean, I guess maybe for anybody that's not familiar with who she is, um,
Right.
maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
So, the Rosies, like, even though it's not just one woman, but Rosie the Riveter just represented a woman for all women who were working to replace men who had gone off to war. And they worked in various different industries, but I think what they're most recognized for is like because they were building the airplanes, the bombers, the fighters. They were, doing a lot of metal work, and just miscellaneous work to get it off the factory line. Because at one point, and I don't have the exact number, but I mean, it was insane the amount of airplanes that were coming off production line every single day. I don't have the exact number for that. Someone will, I hope, if they see this on YouTube, and they could comment.
Yeah, if you
But
know the number, comment, leave a little.
yeah, because it was, and it was a lot because of the women that were doing the work, and the women were eager to get out and roll up their sleeves and, get out of the house, I guess, and, join the war effort. And so I think that is really interesting considering the fact that, 10 years before that, women weren't working at all hardly, unless it was like a teacher or, maybe a secretary.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a way that women could um contribute to the war effort. And I think a lot of women felt uh confidence, like increased confidence in being able to get out into the workplace. I mean, that was really the first time that women were working.
Right, right. And I think I've heard some things, in the depression, sometimes women had to as well, but not in those numbers for sure.
Yeah,
So,
that's pretty interesting. So, yeah, do you have any of your Rosie the Riveter pictures on Instagram?
I can post one. I do have I'm gonna grab this blouse
Okay.
that I wore in one of so this is like an original 1940s blouse, and basically it's nothing really um that special as far as the design goes, in my opinion, but it's just a great example of what a woman may have wore with like a pair of work jeans or work trousers. Also you see a lot of the denim, so the denim coveralls. um but I will have to post a picture on Instagram. I know I have it on my Facebook.
Okay, no, that would be great. Yeah, and Facebook too. So that look is defined kind of like by that wide collar, the big collar.
Yeah, they definitely would have a collar of some sort, a strong shoulder,
Hmm.
and just some structure along the waist. These side pockets, see how little they are? They would sit on the upper hips. This would sit right on the very upper hips. And this
Okay.
is your waistline here. And um, yeah, the biggest thing for the 40s blouses would be either puffy or darted sleeves.
Really cute. And those great big buttons are cute too.
Yes, large buttons as well. These are really cool and fun. I love, and that's another thing. I love vintage buttons. I know we talked about that before.
Yeah, so while we're on that subject, maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the looks, in general with reenacting or just like the 1940s in general. So I thought maybe we could go through a couple of those. So we just talked about the tops, and that women were wearing would women wear skirts and pants during that period of time?
Oh, for sure. Mostly though, it was for work related for pants. Now, if they lived on a farm, obviously, or doing a lot of housework, I imagine women would wear pants outside. But do you mean to wear to work for skirts as
I just
well?
meant like in general, like
Oh,
fashion in
okay.
general in the 40s.
Yeah. So, I don't know if I can. I have an example of a classic silhouette if you would like to see.
Sure, yeah,
See
absolutely.
if I can kind of point it over here. So this would be something, the strong shoulders. This is military inspired. It's not military, but and then the A-line skirt.
Okay.
So sorry about that. Okay, so basically, yeah, um, they would wear pants, but if it was a skirt, it's mostly A-line. And definitely, like I said, with the strong shoulders, larger buttons, as we said, and
Yeah. Yeah. And the pants they seem to have a little wider leg.
wide leg pants, high waist, which would be
High waist.
natural waist. We consider it high waist, but it's just a natural waist. Usually have a button fly. Sometimes they did a zipper, but almost always was a button fly. Usually on the side and sometimes in the front. Sometimes in the front.
Okay. Yeah, these are great things to look for when you're trying to identify clothes from that era, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about also a little more details on that if you want.
Sure, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, in order to identify vintage in general, what I always suggest is look at the type of fabric that it is, and if you're in person, like it's hard to do if you're online, but like if you're in person and you're like at a thrift store, at an antique store, you can feel the fabric first.
Hmm.
And if it feels like a good quality fabric, if it's wool, if it's linen, or if it's like a really nice soft rayon or a silk, chances are it's probably vintage of some era. And if it has a metal zipper, then that is one of the easiest ways to detect if it's from like the 60s or earlier. The large buttons, obviously the 80s did those too, though. And see, that's where I think sometimes it's tricky because the 80s had a lot of like, even though it's vintage now too, isn't it? 80s had a lot of 40s inspiration. But
Strong shoulders. Yeah.
yeah, so I think sometimes if people are like brand new to the idea, then they might get a little bit confused on some of those. But the dead giveaway though would be come down to the fabric. I think the fabric, especially if it's wool or really nice soft rayons or linen blends, um, that is one of the, and then the overall design and the inside as well. Because if it has like a certain, anyone who sews or has ever tried sewing, they probably know what like a serger is. And if you look inside of modern clothes, they'll have like those serged pieces on the seams,
Mm-hmm.
and they wouldn't have had those in the 40s.
So,
So
so yeah, so rather than a surged like a threaded seam, you would have either a stitched seam or like a tape
yeah,
finishing
usually a
tape.
tape. A lot of the ones I found though are actually left. raw, like there's no
Raw.
finish. It's and if it's handmade, you can sometimes tell, like there's no tag, there's no finishings on the inside. It's clearly handmade. And
Yeah.
a lot of that was handmade, which
I
is
get so excited when I find a handmade piece. And I know that a lot of people are really interested in designers and things like that. And I mean, I am too, but like whenever I find a handmade piece, I always just feel like what a story there is with that, because it was made specifically for a specific person. Someone took the time and care to like choose the fabric, choose the pattern,
yeah.
and do all that work. And a lot of times, like you can see they used pinking shears or something on the
Yes,
inside.
that's another thing. Yep. I think
Yeah.
that was really popular in the 60s and 70s for some reason. And I could be wrong, but I feel like it is. But
Yeah, well, it keeps it from unraveling if you're not going
yeah,
to use the if you're not going to use a finishing tape or
right.
a serger. So yeah, I think that's why they did that, because it kept it from like fraying on the edges. That was just like one of the sewing techniques, obviously. But yeah, that's really, I really love finding and the patterns too on the fabric, right? Like that's
Oh, yeah,
the
yeah,
way. So in addition to clothing, what are you collect vintage jewelry.
I
Um,
do.
I'm sure you have lots of accessories. Can you maybe talk a little bit about some of those styles?
In vintage jewelry in general, I mean, it's a whole rabbit hole, as you know.
Yeah.
I mean, you can just get lost in different, variations. But my particular, one of my favorites, I have a couple favorites, but for the jewelry from the 1940s, I like the sweetheart jewelry, and there are reference books online, like on thrift books and stuff. But if you've never heard of sweetheart jewelry and you like that era, I would definitely recommend looking into it because it's really fun. They would usually like buy it like on the BX or um like the men who went off to war, they would buy not just their sweethearts, but sometimes like their mothers and like maybe even their sister, like just a little like a brooch or a necklace or a bracelet even. They made earrings, all kinds of cute patriotic items. So that's just one thing. But I feel like the 40s had a lot of like bold statements for jewelry
Hmm.
and their hats. The hats in the 1940s are really, really fun. They're usually either small or big, right? Like there's not a lot of in between. I mean, there are, but 90% of them are either big or really tiny, and they would just like tilt on the side of the head.
Okay. Almost like a fascinator type of look.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of them, and I didn't know this until probably just a couple years ago, because I had some hats that had like this strange, like a loop on the back, and it would just go around the back of your head.
Hmm.
So yeah, so that way it can actually just stay right there, and you can just pin it on the back of your hair. And
Oh, okay.
that's one way to tell if a hat is from the 1940s. I wish I should have brought one out here for an example, but sorry about that. But yeah, so like if you see like it's like basically like a fabric like loop, it could be a strip of fabric or it could be like a something else, but usually goes around the back of the hat and you can just kind of pin it in place.
Secure it in place. And so
Yeah.
did women generally wear their hair up?
I think a lot of women wore it half up, half down. A lot of them cut their hair a little shorter. Um, Not super short. I think most hair length was like to the shoulder, or maybe a little bit past the shoulder, but when they curled it, it would go up, to like this length
Mhm.
or even shorter sometimes. And victory rolls, that's one of the common hairstyles that you see, even though there's so many other hairstyles though. I do have a great book recommendation, and I got this from thrift books. It's called 1940s Hairstyles by Daniela Turadic, 1940s hairstyles. But
Oh,
this,
look at that.
yeah. And so they actually show you like the way to pin your hair for various hairstyles. I mean, it's a great resource. Um, and you can usually find it, like I said, on thrift books or eBay, really relatively cheap. So, you can also for those of us who like looking at tutorials, there's a lot of people online doing tutorials. I mean, um, Rachel Maskey, I think that's how you pronounce her name. She does good ones. They're older videos. I think Cherry Dollface is made. She does a lot of different vintage hairstyles about that. Women would definitely wear their hair up, but they would also wear it different ways as well.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen the half up, half down with the even like the victory roll on the top and everything. And I think that that's just a lot of labor of love went into fixing your hair, I think.
Yeah, a lot of pin curls
Mm.
and sleeping with it overnight, or wearing it all day. Those are the only options. You gotta let it set for like a good 6 to 8 hours at least.
Yeah, because there weren't really a lot of hot tools back then to
Right. Right. I mean, I don't think there were. If there were, then they definitely weren't as I don't think they were as effective.
yeah.
So
Yeah, because you had to heat them up. They weren't electric necessarily. Um, like what we have now.
right, nothing like that, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Really interesting. Okay, so maybe you can talk a little bit about the shoe styles and hosiery.
Okay.
Because I think that that's interesting. I mean, this is sort of like an interesting time for hosiery because it's sort of right before the invention of like full length pull.
Right, right. That was like in the 60s that those pantyhose came out.
Okay.
And so they were wearing like silk and wool stockings back in like the 20s and 30s, I believe. And then nylon stockings became a thing. But then when the war fully broke out, nylon was in such short supply that a lot of women were actually you baking it with leg makeup, like just
Oh,
making their legs look darker with leg makeup, and then they would use like maybe some kind of brown pencil and just fake the seam up the back of the leg, or have a friend do it. I've seen pictures with friends doing it for each other, because the seamed stockings, that's definitely a staple. And even for women, like the walks, the women that were in the army auxiliary, they wore seam stockings. The wasp, like I talked about earlier, they actually got some stockings for Christmas from, I don't know, the higher ups, I guess. They gave them all stockings because they were so hard to get, so it was like a treasure, you know. So that was a big thing, the hosiery for sure. And like garter belts, obviously you need your garter belt to hold up the thigh highs, because they weren't, pantyhose, they were just thigh highs. So you need your garter belts to hold up your stockings.
that's so interesting and probably not the most comfortable maybe to wear on a regular basis.
I mean, not really. I do wear them when I reenact, and I get a lot of comments like, "Where do you get your stockings?" So actually, one of the only places I can find them is what Katie did, and they're UK based. A lot
Okay.
of vintage stuff is from the UK.
That's really neat. And another interesting thing that I think was that people would repair their stockings. I mean,
Oh yeah, for sure. They would definitely try to make it last as long as possible.
so the shoes of this era are pretty iconic. What
Yes.
are some of the styles that you prefer, or some of the ones that are the most well known?
So I love the 1940s shoes because first of all, they're usually pretty comfortable if you can get a pair that actually fit you, because they're usually pretty tiny. But they usually have a peep toe, and then they usually have either an ankle strap, or sometimes they're a pump, a sling back. But the heels aren't very big. They're usually 2 inches or maybe 3 inches at the most, and they're like a cone shape. And again, I apologize. I should have had a reference on, but I do have some on my Instagram. If you ever want to do a podcast just on shoes, I would love that.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, there's so much to talk about with shoes.
Yes. That's probably one of my favorite things as far as collecting goes,
Okay.
other than the jewelry.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's easy to fall in love with jewelry, and the shoes. I love that the shoes of that era are more comfortable and a little bit more practical,
Yeah.
but they
Yeah,
still
you
have
won't see any stilettos or anything. No.
they still have a very distinct style though, and they're very attractive. I think with the style of clothing, um,
Yeah.
very well made.
Yeah, very well made. A lot of them have a leather sole, and that's I mean, I guess that's just one of the reasons is because people when they wear it to dance, they would prefer a leather sole, so they, so they kind of slide instead of just kind of sticking to the floor.
Okay.
Um, so even in reproduction shoes, you'll find a lot of leather soles, which again, that to me, that's not as comfortable as a rubber, rubber sole,
Mhm.
but that's definitely a way to, you know, look at and ID some shoes, if it has a leather sole.
Yeah, I think that's always one of the first things that I look for is to see if a pair of shoes has a leather sole when I'm trying to figure out are they like a modern reproduction or are they authentic?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
in addition to the insole, the like if they printed the name of the
Yeah, I was gonna say like
garment.
the label inside of it, that's usually it's pretty ornate, like the script always was fancier, cursive, like big script.
Yes.
Not always, but a lot of times.
Yeah.
But again, I think it goes down to the craftsmanship, just like with the clothes, you know.
Yeah, you can tell a well-made shoe when you look at it, I think.
And the sizes are generally smaller than what they say.
That's true. Always try it on, always measure.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
yeah, vintage sizes have changed quite a lot over the years,
Yes.
and people
Because
have tiny feet.
yeah, and even like for the clothing, like a size 12 would be more like a size 4 modern, something like that. So confusing. But
Yeah,
but
yeah.
once you realize what it is, then you get used to it. But
I think a lot of that's why sellers, it's so important to put the measurements.
the measurements are key, especially waist measurements, because women apparently didn't eat much back in the 40s. They have like well, they did have like rationing and stuff, and even in the 50s, in the 60s, you start to see a little bit bigger sizes. I feel like maybe, I don't know, but it's just I think women just didn't eat that much
Yeah.
because of
Yeah.
the food. You had to restrict your diet.
Interesting. Well, I imagine that could be the case. I'd be interested to look into that a little bit more.
Yeah,
I would
yeah.
think people were more active
Well,
at the
yeah, that
time.
too, for sure.
Yeah. And would eat more uh you know,
Freshly grown,
yes, that's the word I was looking for. Yeah, fresh foods.
like farm food, like even like if you're eating meat, like chances are it came like locally.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, not prepackaged foods like we eat now.
No McDonald's. I'm sorry.
No McDonald's in the 40s.
Nah.
So so for anybody who's interested, where do you get your vintage clothing from?
So a lot of mine, this probably doesn't help very many people, but a lot of my favorite things have been gifted to me from like my friends who collect vintage, and we swap sometimes, and friends, family. But the things I've actually purchased, the best things I found at antique shops and thrift shops sometimes, but antique shops or like a vintage specialty shop, like we mentioned, Tina's, like that would be a little better because they've taken the time to source good quality items. If you're a real treasure hunter, I would definitely suggest doing the antique shops because you can find usually pretty good deals. And the best pieces that I found were from antique shops for just a few dollars usually, like maybe $10, you know, per dress, which I think is really cheap.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's cheaper than a modern dress and can
Yeah.
last you a lifetime. Um yeah, I think from a sourcing standpoint for me, I don't see clothing of that era in the thrift shop. It's very rare. Just
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have to.
I have found a couple pieces Um, 50s, 60s stuff more commonly acquired. 70s and 80s, you're going to be able to find that pretty easily,
Mhm.
I think. If you thrift shop on a regular basis, it takes a little bit of endurance.
Yeah, and to sort through every piece of clothing and to
It,
know what you're looking for.
yes,
Mhm.
yes. eBay is a good, catch-all, as you know, probably. And Etsy, I've bought some really beautiful jewelry pieces from Etsy. So
Yes, yes, there's a lot of gorgeous jewelry on Etsy, vintage jewelry. Um, and I've seen it on Ruby Lane as
Ruby
well. I think
Lane,
there's
yeah,
some.
Ruby Lane, and even places like Macari, Poshmark,
Mhm.
um, Facebook Marketplace is a great. I mean, you can find a lot of good furniture on there. That's what I usually use it for. But definitely, you can also find good vintage things on Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen that.
Relatively, usually affordable.
Mhm. Like somebody might be selling it in a lot. They cleaned out an estate, or they're, family pieces. They're cleaning out the jewelry box, their jewelry box.
Yes. So that's one thing I forgot to say, estate sales and auctions.
Mhm.
If you can find those, get in there, because some of my other favorite pieces that I've purchased were from auctions, like that 1940s blouse I showed you, that came from an auction. And I had to clean it up. It wasn't in good condition, but I got a bunch of 40s and 50s pieces, maybe like 30 pieces. And only a handful actually fit me, sadly. So, but I had to really clean it up. But it's definitely worth it to do an auction.
I think that's where I found the most older vintage pieces, like a beautiful purple wool suit I
Ah,
got
that
in.
sounds
It's
that sounds amazing.
kind of tiny. I'll have to show it to you, but yeah, that was one that I found at an auction. And I'll never forget this this lady's home, and she had saved every formal gown that she had
Oh,
ever worn.
oh wow.
Yeah. So when she was young, even as a child, she had a few pieces like that. And then she had all of her prom dresses, all of her special formal event dresses, her wedding dresses, and everything. And so you had to climb into this attic that was really dirty. It was very filthy up there. And there was sort of like a clothes.
There's a price to be paid for the good stuff.
Yeah, I know, right? You got to get a little bit dirty to find the.
You always do.
Mhm. Yeah, and she had a clothesline with all of these items hanging up. And when I walked into that room, I was like just floored. Beautiful, some beautiful things. And
Wow.
yep, and some coats and things like that. And then she also had a couple of boxes filled with like some sweaters and some menswear and stuff. So she must have kept things from her family, or I don't know if they were her children's things or her things or whatever it was, but I mean, it was just a collection that blew me away. And
Wow.
but those are the days that you know
Yeah.
you hunt for. you wait
Yes. Yes.
you wait
Especially
for
if
that
you're a
moment.
reseller, you got to do that. I mean, you got to get in there and do that kind of thing. But if you're just shopping for yourself, I mean, you don't have to go as hard with it, unless you want to.
Yeah, I mean, some places like Tina's, I mean, she's done all that hard work for you.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. And
Yeah.
if you don't have the time to commit, then you can just definitely hit up someone like her, or an antique shop.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I found some really great shoes in antique shops as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
never I've never purchased antique shoes at an antique shop, because I think I've only found a couple pairs and they were my size. And I could have just got them just to hoard them, but no.
We're gonna talk about that part of collecting.
Whole nother subject.
Yeah, that's a whole different day. I'm just kidding, but yeah. So okay, so let me see. I did have another question for you about that. Um yeah, so we can talk about a little bit more about identifying clothing. And you had talked about some resources that were really helpful to you, a few books and things like that.
Hmm.
What are some other resources that use to just like improve your knowledge? Because obviously you're saying, you know, especially World War II reenacting is sort of new to you. Like you must have places that you go to for information.
Yes. So other than books, because like I said, there's a lot of different 1940s reference books. But other than books, you can also hop on, if you're on Facebook. I don't know of any Instagram ones, but you can utilize the vintage fashion groups on there. They have various like reenactment ones and a couple different ones from the 1940s. One is called I Love the 1940s. One is authentic 1940s authentic fashion and beauty. I believe that's what it's called. That's a really helpful one because women will give honest critiques if you ask them, and I like that and appreciate that.
Hmm.
And then other than that, just having friends in your corner that have been, you know, a little more experienced, or they may know the ropes of a certain style or a certain, you know, way of dressing, and you just want to kind of ask their opinion and go from there. Also, I mean, asking people who've lived through it, like some of my friends are way, way, way older than me, and I'll just ask them, "Hey, is that like correct?" And they'll be like, "Oh yeah, my mom wore that."
Yeah, you can't get
Or
any,
my grandma wore that, you know?
yeah, can't get any more knowledgeable than that. Old photos are such a great source too.
Old photos. I love the photo that you sent me. I wish you could post that one, like on your Instagram.
I'll post it. My
The
grandmother.
dress that she had was so cute, and you look a little bit like her, I feel like.
Maybe. um, she was very stylish, I would say, especially when she was younger, maybe through the 70s. I don't know. There were a lot of polyester pantsuits going on in that period.
Oh, that was everybody though, I think.
But yeah, she really had the fashion of the 40s pretty much nailed, I think, with the
Oh
rayon
yeah,
rayon dress and the peep toe
the hair. Yeah,
And
it
she had
was
the
super
cat eye
cute.
glasses.
And her watch, I even saw her watch. I have a little watch similar to that. So I
Oh,
was
I
like,
didn't
oh,
even notice that. I'm gonna have to take a look.
yeah,
I'll have to take a
very
look.
cute. But I love looking at old photographs. That's a great point. And you can even find old photo albums at auctions. I've found so many. Of course, a lot of them do tend to go a little higher, but um, eBay, Etsy, again, places like that. Like look
Mhm.
for photo albums. That's a really good, even family photos, ancestry. I recently did like a little ancestry search, and I found like pictures of my aunts in the 50s, and I was like, whoa, I was so like mesmerized, you know? Like it was
Oh,
fascinating to me. Um, and I never really had any grandparents. Like I had one grandmother, but she was like already like in poor health, and unfortunately she just wasn't the nicest to me, and we didn't have a close relationship. She lived out of state, and so my dad would bring us like maybe a couple times a year to go visit. But so I think that's one reason why I also cling to like older friends, is like I'm looking for that like grandparent relationship, you know?
yeah.
And I think it's awesome, you know, to the stories that they can tell. So, but definitely if you can get it from your grandparents, that's the best. Or some
Yeah.
kind of relative, you know?
Yeah. It's so I'm so um lucky to have family photos that have been passed down through the generations.
Yeah,
And
that's awesome.
I do have a book. My grandfather was in World War II. The one that was married to my nanny, who was the picture that you saw. And
Yeah.
so he had a lot, like a full album of kind of small sized pictures that were taken during the war.
I would
Um,
like to see those too.
yeah, I'd be happy to share them with you. Oh my gosh,
I
it's
love
really
looking at that.
to see what, what he experienced. Obviously, it doesn't show anything during combat, but it's, all of the like locations that he was at, and you get to see the different uniforms that they were wearing and his
Yeah.
friends, and
Yeah, that's neat.
yeah, just the camaraderie that they had at the
Oh
time.
yeah. And a lot of them I heard from a World War II veteran that they weren't supposed to be taking pictures of a lot of that stuff. Like they weren't allowed to take pictures of the airplanes, but they snuck it.
You have to have
It's
a little
interesting.
joy, I guess.
Between 18 to like 20 something year old guys. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah. I'm sure they were pretty proud of their planes. And
Right.
yeah, there were a few tank pictures in the
Oh,
ones that my
neat.
grandfather had. Yeah, those were really neat.
So he was in the army in a tank division, I guess.
To be honest, I don't really know because he passed away before I was born. And so I never got to
Oh,
ask
okay.
him those
Yeah.
questions. So either he was in a tank division or they were just excited to pose in front of a tank,
Yeah.
which I could see that happening
I
too.
don't blame him. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, it was pretty impressive. So that was really neat. And so, the other thing that we haven't really talked about is just your sewing skills and the vintage patterns that you use. So in addition to buying, you make a lot of your own clothing, right?
Yes. So that's what I was going to say when you say, where do you get your clothes? So actually about 90% of my clothes that I wear are vintage inspired, made by me. And a lot of the pieces I've made for myself, I've used vintage patterns or adjusted them somehow. I use a couple of reproduction patterns too, but mostly vintage patterns. And that is pretty much something I've been doing quite heavily for the past 4 years, 5 years, just making more stuff pieces for myself because before I would just sew for other people
Mm.
and I never sewed anything for myself. And I was like, well, I'm going to start making a few things for myself, and the things that I've made, obviously, you know, I get to wear them as often as I want. But so I do sewing for other people as well. I've done more custom pieces in the past, but I'd like to focus on doing just X amount of designs. And that's where Tina's comes into play. So she's sourcing like a lot of vintage fabrics or vintage inspired fabrics. And then I would be using vintage patterns that I've sized or adjusted or both. Kind of, well, I'll be using my own patterns as well, that I've made 90% from scratch. Because I would take like a base of a vintage pattern, for example, if I like the bodice, I'll maybe just tweak it a little bit, like maybe lengthen it or change the neckline, or like for instance, you can change a wrap dress into a robe, I did that before. It's just stuff like that. So that's, you got to really think outside the box when you are using vintage patterns too. Like if you have to kind of look at it as this is the overall design and this is something that I want to achieve, and how can I tweak it just to fit exactly what I want it to look like. And so you start with a little sketch and then you just kind of tweak it and test it, and it's a whole process. But it gets easier with practice. I've been sewing since high school. My mom got me lessons with a tailor that she worked at a bank, and one of her friends, they became friends, I guess, because he was such a good customer, and so she hired him to teach me the basics, and then from there I did go to fashion design school, and I learned a little more with the pattern drafting and stuff. And then I haven't sewn consistently when I was like a young mom, but I've been sewing pretty consistently for the past 10 years, give or take, um, especially in the past like 5 to 10 years.
So how long does it usually take you to create a dress or an outfit from start to finish?
So from the cutting table to the time when I'm finished the hem, I would say anywhere between 6 to 8 hours for a pretty basic dress. No, well, moderate. We'll say moderately designed dress. If it's like really, really detailed, maybe a little longer.
You're
But that's about.
fast. That's quick. But it's still at the same time, it's a lot of work to put into, one piece.
Yeah, like if you're doing something more detailed, like if you're doing like a tailored suit, I mean that could take you days. So
Yeah. And so you're working with Tina to launch a line of vintage clothing, but that would be more in modern sizes?
So yes, I did make a size chart. It was a struggle for me to really narrow it down. So I did make a size chart and I posted it. I'll probably post it on my Instagram as well. But this is specifically for the play suits. We're going to do plus size down the road, but I need to test each size like properly, or it's almost a waste of time to guess because plus size is a little more um, there's more variables and it can be a little bit trickier for me just because I'm not as experienced sizing up, to like say like a 4 or 5X. I've done like 2X but to go further than that is going to be take more time to finalize that. But so the play suits are basically 2 or 3 piece like um casual cute outfits that someone would in the 1940s or 50s they would wear it to the beach or outside. Even like they started in the 30s like as like tennis wear, like or
Oh,
sportswear.
mhm.
And then women started, I guess, wearing them to the beach and wearing them out in the yard playing with the kids, that kind of thing. Or I guess sun tanning, I guess, like if they're just wanting to tan on their legs or something.
Yeah. So can you describe what it looks like? Is it pants, shorts? Does it look like a bathing suit?
So the designs that I'm doing now are shorts and a bolero with like a crop top.
Oh,
So
cute.
you get like a little section of your midsection, but nothing real scary. It's just just like a couple inches of your midsection or an inch of your midsection. And then of course on some of them the bolero will be optional, but so it's basically a 3-piece play suit. And I was also going to do like a skirt and possibly a pair of pants, like the really wide leg pants. So those are all different. And then there'll be like 2 or 3 different variations on the top, the bodice, the crop top. So one more for the 50s. I'll probably do 2 for the 1940s styles.
Okay, that sounds wonderful. And what's your goal then for having these, and how can people get them when they're ready?
So my ultimate goal would have my patterns in PDF for these specific play suits. And if they want to purchase these play suits, like the actual sewn pieces, then they can do so at Tina's
Mm.
Timeless Threads. She has the website also and also her store in Dover, Delaware. So if you're local to Dover, Delaware, definitely you can head over there. But that is my goal for that right now. And hopefully by this summer I can work on both as far as the patterns go. And also she'll have the samples as we get them ready.
That's exciting. That's so exciting. And I'm sure she'll have some fabulous models modeling them and
Oh yeah.
get some great
Yes.
photos so we can see what they
Yes.
look like. So, um, okay, that's awesome. So I guess maybe if you want to just talk about a couple of fun things, I have some fun questions for you.
Okay. Sure.
All right, first question is, if you could go back to any time period in history, what would it be and who would you be?
That's really hard for me to narrow down, okay? But I thought about it and I said, I think the 1920s actually sounds kind of fun, like post like depression or pre-depression, like to be in the 1920s and just experience that whole flapper vibe. To me that sounds kind of fun.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
Especially if you're really young during those days, like but at my age, I think I'd rather be like a post World War II wife or dressmaker. So either one.
Okay, that's great. Those are very different personas, I think.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. What is maybe the most exciting or uh beloved outfit or piece of clothing that you've sourced, made, that you have?
That's another difficult one, but probably I'd have to say my jewelry, my sweetheart jewelry
Mm.
it's not clothing, but that's probably my most treasured pieces. As far as clothing goes, um I don't have it anymore, but I did have this really amazing it was like a seersucker. The fabric was so soft and it was like palm trees. It was this long, like crazy robe. It was like dead on for the 50s, you know. And it had this huge button, like probably like that big in the center of the waist. It was so cute. And I got that one at like an estate sale. It was like a lounging robe, I guess.
Mm.
I don't know what if they would call them a hostess gown.
Oh,
I think,
yes. Uh-huh.
yeah, yeah.
That
That was
fabric
probably
sounds
one of my favorites.
fabulous. Yeah.
That was so cute, and I don't know why. I think I was just like going through one of those cleanups, and I was just like, oh well, I'll let it. I think I've sold it, you know, and kind of regret it, but that was one of my favorites.
Hopefully you'll find a new one. And that comes to my next question. Is there a special piece that you've been searching for, but you haven't been able to find yet?
Yes. So I want a red or navy blue wool tailored 1940s authentic suit, skirt suit. Um, And funny story, actually, it's funny now, but I was like beating myself up about it. I went to World War II weekend, which every year is the first weekend of June in Reading, Pennsylvania, at the Mid-Atlantic Air Museum. And they have a couple of sellers there. Like they'll have a flea market and they have a little dress shop. And I went inside and I saw this red suit hanging, and then something was just like, oh, go get that. So I fought with myself because I was like, I don't feel like carrying this suit around. And I thought it was going to be too small. And my son was with me and it was just rushed. And I went to go back to try to find it and it was gone.
Oh.
So that is what I'm after, is what eluded me. A red suit would be great, or navy blue, but because usually when you find a suit, they're like gray, and I have a gray suit and that I made. But yeah, that's what I'm after.
All right. So if anybody out there has a wool suit in red or navy blue.
Yeah, in like a size 6-ish. Like, yeah, that would be great.
Like a modern size 6.
Yeah, I don't know what size that would be, like an 18 or so, I guess, vintage size.
Yeah, what a big difference.
I know. Crazy.
All right, so hit Cherrish up on Instagram.
Yeah, really.
Or Facebook if you have a suit like that. So
and I can trade too.
That sounds awesome. So what advice would you give to someone who was interested in starting to collect vintage clothing, but maybe they didn't know how to get started?
Definitely go to a few of the resources that we mentioned before, like just talk to some people and look on some vintage Facebook groups, but also Vintage Dancer. I know we talked about that before. She's a really good resource for everything vintage. So you could pop on her website and see what kinds of things that she has to say about various decades and styles. I would definitely start there. And rather than going thrifting, it can be really overwhelming. I wouldn't recommend thrifting to start out, even if you're on a budget, because if you go to an antique store versus a thrift shop, you're going to find better things and usually pretty affordable. And that's or eBay. But I would definitely say start out in person where you can shop and touch and feel things and try things on.
Yeah.
Rather than buying everything online, because everything is like across, you don't know what you're getting. And then also the measurements may not even be accurate from what the seller's saying. So just when you're first starting out, I would suggest doing in-person shopping rather than online, hitting up antique shops or vintage dealers. Even if you're on a budget, because I always feel like it's better to have quality over quantity.
That's very good advice. Yeah. I mean, even if you just find a couple of pieces, couple of really nice, authentic vintage pieces, you can mix them in with modern.
Like a capsule wardrobe, yeah. Like cardigans, skirts, blouses, high-waisted trousers, and then there you go, and then just a couple pairs of shoes.
Yeah, and mix them in. Yeah, that's great advice. Well, thank you so much for all that. And I would love to share how people can get in touch with you. Maybe your social details, or if you have a website.
So Cherrish Marie Vintage at Instagram and Facebook. I do have a website, but it's not active at the moment because I'm trying to decide what to do with the patterns and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So for now, the social media is the best place to contact me, either
Okay.
Facebook, Cherrish Marie Vintage, Facebook, or Instagram.
All right. And that's, can you spell that since you
Yes,
spell your name differently?
yes. So Cherrish with two R's, Cherrish, Marie, Mari, Vintage. And that's
Vintage.
it.
Cherish Marie Vintage on Instagram and Facebook. Yep. That's
Yes,
great.
ma'am.
Yes. And you'll find some great pictures there of her style, of you doing your reenacting as well.
I'll add some more pictures of that as well.
Okay. No, that's great. I think everybody loves to be able to see what we're talking about here on the podcast. So, all right. Well,
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that.
yeah. Well, I thank you so much for being on here, taking your time and sharing your knowledge.
You're welcome. Well, thank you for inviting me. It was fun. And, like I said, anytime you want to talk about shoes or accessories and whatever down the road, that's fine.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have you back. And I'm interested to learn more about this sweetheart jewelry too. That's something that I'd like to dive into at some point. 'Cause,
Okay.
yeah, I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I can send you resources too.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of
Yes,
the
thank
Vintage
you.
Aquarium. Yeah. And if you take a look in the show notes, there's information on how you can connect with Cherrish. There's information on how you can connect with the Vintage Aquarium, sign up for our newsletter, email newsletter, and also where you can find us on the socials, and you'll find us on YouTube and on wherever you get your podcast from. So
All right.
thanks again, Cherrish.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Have a good one.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.